we call the roll. Tawana, not yet. Patricia,
Here.
okay, and Lakeisha.
I'm not sure she's hearing. She hasn't got her earphones in.
Yeah, she's turned off.
She's here. I'll say here for her. We see.
Okay. Yeah, she's got her.
I'm
there she
here.
goes.
There
Okay.
she goes.
Okay. Do we have an emotion to amend or adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, we do have previous policy minutes to adopt.
I move we adopt the minutes.
Is there a second? Lakeisha?
She's
Second.
speaking. Okay.
Attendance report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure that you've all heard by now that Governor Kemp has extended our time out of school until April 24th. So we're now out for an additional month. I know the parents of you are really excited about that opportunity to continue homeschooling your children. We will probably have a couple of policies that need to be amended. However, we have received some waivers that came through today, about 18 waivers from the state BOE that we're trying to work through. At this time, Mr. Gaskins is having a meeting with cabinet, and we have a call meeting with all principals virtually tomorrow to look at those waivers. But if those blanket waivers don't address our needs, we may either need to have a call policy meeting or ask you all to suspend board rules and take policy directly to work session next week for things such as how we'll handle grading, seat time, things of that nature. But hopefully all of those are needs that everyone nationally, but specifically the state of Georgia will need, and they'll be addressed by Superintendent Woods.
Okay.
I think we could be, I could be available for a short meeting if we needed to approve some things.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I will let you all know as soon as we really just need to read through those waivers and see what it allows us to do compared to what we feel like we need to do in the best interest of our students. And then we can come back. We noticed there was one, excuse me, that looks to be specific to seniors that actually said you can award credit at any time. So something like that, I mean, we could end up saying that the year is over for our seniors. I mean, there are things that we could do of that nature, or we could say those seniors who are passing, the year is over, and then allow X amount of time for those aren't passing to get those that coursework in. So things like that that we really just need to look through and see what's out there, and then we can come back to you all with recommendations.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's it for me, Mr. Davis.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a way to see everyone? Because right now I only see Zanona. I don't even see myself.
There's up in the window, there's a box of 4. I can see 5 at once. I can't see all 9 at once.
Harold, can you change your view? Because that's the view that's being live streamed. So can you make it like a long grid?
It looks like Mr. Stevens has joined us as well. Is that you, Mr. Stevens?
He's muted.
Okay, does that look like his number, Ms. Palmer?
It does. It is his number. That's correct. Harold, are you still there?
Yes, I don't know what you're talking about, though.
So on your screen, because it's your screen that's live stream. Can you expand it so it's a grid? Or is that Dawn's?
I think it's Don's screen.
Yeah, and all
that
I
we're
see, I see
sharing.
mostly the agenda, which is great, but if that was minimized, or if I could
So-
refer back to it,
I think Mr.
Okay.
Davis has to do something. He has to do something on his computer in order to
Okay.
see everybody.
No, I'm talking about what's on the live stream, Harold, not his, because it's connected to your computer.
I believe everyone has to change their own settings to which view they would like to see
Yes.
the pictures.
So Greg, you should have two windows. One is the agenda window, which is Don's screen, and the other is a strip of a strip window. And there's 4 or 5 different boxes. One that looks like 4 tiles next to each other. One that looks like a little tile inside of a big tile. Can you see that window?
this is on, where is it located?
Probably next to the picture. So Greg, you should have 2 windows. One is the agenda window, which is Don's screen, and the other is a strip of so do you have a window where you have one picture?
Yes, you.
Okay. Oh, good, because I'm talking. So if you go to the left corner or the top corner of that window,
Okay.
there should be some little white boxes. Maybe?
No, I do see a view options in the
Okay.
center,
View options, then click on
but
the
it one says Zoom ratio, hide video panel, request remote control.
Oh,
I don't know. I hate to push any of those.
hmm.
Boy, I'm sorry.
Oh, Greg, can you see somebody?
I see you. I see
Okay.
who's ever talking.
Yeah,
Yes.
that may have to be something on
My computer.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see the 9 blue dots at the very top of your screen?
Nope.
It looks like a telephone keypad
Nope.
or a grid.
Mr. Davis, if you're comfortable, I think it'll show whoever's talking when they talk. So I think that it's okay to proceed with the meeting as it is.
Okay. Okey doke. Let me go ahead and do the policy committee chair report. I did want to mention that we had 3 policies out for review, and you know, we will get a report, I'm sure, from Don next week in terms of any community feedback. But one was BCBI, which was public participation in board meetings. So we may have some discussion on that, because I know there were a couple of folks on the board who didn't approve of that last time we discussed it. The other one is BDC, which is on policy adoption, and I don't think that's too controversial. And then we have a third one dealing with, I believe it's isn't it Spanish as something to do with credits, Don, or the
It's about foreign students, foreign
right.
exchange students.
So I just wanted to kind of refresh people's minds on that. And then one policy that we were going to get into with a number of folks from the cabinet was that DJE. So that's still, at least in terms of my mind, front and center next time, you know, we're able to see each other face to face, and hopefully Dr. Thomas can maybe preface this as well, her opinions before we actually discuss that policy along with the CFO and whoever else Dr. Thomas thinks would be pertinent to that discussion. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I would like the approval of the committee to move forward to our membership, to our regular meeting, 2 proposed resolutions for the Government Operations Committee that presumably will still be held in April, some kind of way. And what these proposed resolutions will do is that they'll be discussed before the, like I said, the Government Operations Committee of GSBA. If they're approved there, then they would go on to the summer conference that Lakeisha will be attending and voted on there. One of those proposed both of these are resolutions that we pushed forward last year, and I think they're still pertinent. One of them deals with in-state tuition for students who are not citizens, but who have attended our educational K-12 educational system and are now being charged, in some cases, triple the tuition rates, and for public universities and colleges in the state. And so this resolution would ask GSBA to lobby on behalf of them, those types of students, and to convince the state legislature that this is not in the best interest of the state or these students. And then the second proposal for GSBA would be to oppose a 2-tier wage system for teachers that has been bandied about for the last few years in the state of Georgia, and has indeed been accepted in a few other states. So anyway, that's kind of a proactive piece that I would like, this committee to adopt or acquiesce to pushing it forward to the work session and to the general meeting.
Mr. Davis, would that be the work of the Government Relations Committee?
Yeah, because they are part of the of dealing with the state legislature.
So, Dawn, does that mean you think we shouldn't be doing this in policy committee?
Well, I guess it's more of a question. I don't know the answer, but I'm not sure that any
Oh, I see what you're talking about.
items.
Yeah, you're right.
require
You're
policy
right. You're
action,
right.
Local policy action.
You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. You're exactly right, Don. I'm just kind of jumped the gun here. Yep.
No,
forget
it's
that.
all very important. Maybe just.
Yeah, forget that. No, you're right. You're right. I'm she just shows you how out of sync I am. You're right. It was just on my mind. And so this is my first opportunity. But we didn't
No
have a
worries.
government relations meeting. Okay, I stand corrected. Let's move on. Okay, the attorney's memorandum.
We'll actually speak to it as we go through the policy
Okay.
and the code of conduct. The
Okay,
recommendation.
let's go ahead and do that then.
So our first action item for the committee to consider is a very minor revision to policy JCDA. And this is the policy that is aligned. The code of conduct is actually the exhibit. And so this is the policy. And this change is based on a recommendation from our schools, from teachers and administrators. And it speaks to this. There's only one line that we're recommending. Let me show you that. One line that we're recommending be struck.
Yeah, it's on there.
You can see it. And it's a line that says, parents shall be required to sign and return an acknowledgement of the receipt of the code to the school. So historically, and I don't know for how many years previous, but for a long time, we have included in the code of conduct a form that looks like this. And it asks parents to say that they received the code and sign it and return it. And in reality, what's happened is obtaining signatures is really ineffective and cumbersome. We get a small fraction of them back from our parents. And in reality, not signing the paper in no way limits the school or the district or administrators from implementing student discipline. So it's really a requirement that while it probably began through the state law requiring parent acknowledgement as a form of engaging parents, in reality, it creates and distracts from a lot of time that administrators and teachers feel they would better spend doing actual family engagement and work with students to be shuffling paper. And so they have asked us, as we revise the code, to consider the option of simply removing this requirement from our local policy. I asked Mr. Pruitt to take a look through our state charter status to see, as a charter school district, if we are required to comply with this part of state law, and we are not. We can enact, and this would be, I recommend, a really great use of the flexibility that's offered and afforded to the district as a charter school district, to exercise that charter flexibility and simply remove this line from our policy and not require our really busy teachers and administrators to be shuffling paper that, again, doesn't really mean anything anyways. If you don't sign this paper of acknowledgement, it doesn't mean anything. It's just our way of saying, thanks for reading the code of conduct. So all that we would need to do, if the committee agrees with this change, is remove the language from our policy and then notify the state that we're exercising our charter status to waive this state requirement. Are there any questions about that? Any feedback?
I always thought it was a little odd as a parent.
I think, Dr. Yeager, to your point, we want to be judicious when we ask a lot of our parents and we send a lot of paper and a lot of applications. If we can be judicious and intentional about when we really need their attention to something, I think we are more likely to then get things signed that are required. This is not either required or, as the schools have told us, useful in any way, shape, or form. It has never been brought to bear at a discipline hearing where someone has said, I didn't sign that form, you can't bring my student to a hearing. It's just, and to even print pieces of paper for 14,000 students, I would say is environmentally unfriendly. So I think there's several reasons why it's just unnecessary, and we can simply remove it from our policy if we wish to change our practice.
Okay, I'm on board. What do you guys think?
This is Linda, and sorry I'm joining you late, but I'm still on my in my class.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, I feel like it's I hear what you're saying, but when I look at I guess my question would be, for the ones that you get back, are they from the people that are typically the people who violate our code of conduct?
No, I would
Any way of knowing?
no correlation, Ms. Davis. I don't have data to support that, but I think the forms we get back are just randomly from the families that send things back signed. It also, I think, creates for our non-native speaking families some confusion because it sounds so official and a little bit legal and scary. And again, so I think it creates this false narrative that there's something that will happen to you or not happen to you if you sign it. And that's just simply untrue. The code exists by nature of you sending your child to school in our school district and enrolling. You are bound by whatever our code of conduct says about student discipline. So
I'm wondering if we could require that the code of conduct acknowledgements be executed at the time of parent conferences.
I was gonna say the same thing. I agree with that. Yeah, I thought.
I am not comfortable just disregarding that. Again, there's something, we have a huge problem with discipline from what, 10% of our kids? And so if we only target those 10%, I'm probably more comfortable with that than removing any teeth in this policy. Yeah. So we send the document home and we think that we want them to abide by it. We use it in every single one of our hearings. And just an acknowledgement that we received the code of conduct, if it can be handled in a, what is it, more of a pass off or handoff way through parents and teachers, I would be more comfortable with that. But every kid gets a conference. And so I would suggest that we alter that to have that as something that is, you know, completed during the course of the school year.
But of course, that conference takes place, you know, what, midway through
Doesn't matter.
first semester?
That doesn't matter to me. As long as it happens every school year, I think that would be reasonable. Again, the idea would be not to take the teeth away from the importance and the significance. This is a huge document that a lot of work goes into. And if people aren't acknowledging that they even know that it exists, then I think I'm having a problem with even having a code of conduct.
But Linda, I think Dawn's point is that there are no teeth, that having them sign or not sign has no teeth.
But I
So
think
it's irrelevant.
Transferring that responsibility to the parents and the teachers to get that signed, I think is a different thing. And I hate to burden the teachers, but they're the ones who are dealing with the kids and their discipline issues. So that's my take on that.
I mean, the problem is, from a teacher perspective, is what you do with them when you get them. That was always, I mean, because I think we've been doing it a long time. I mean, most school systems have, but
I think they can have a 1-year retention on them and they can be void at the end of the school year. And they can
who
be
keeps
shredded.
them? Who keeps them?
They can go up to the front desk. I don't really, you know, it just matters. Do they keep any documents at all on the students?
Well, yeah, teachers keep a lot of documents on the student.
Okay, so it's just one more piece of paper.
But Linda, I think the point is they're not getting returned, and it's.
But I'm saying don't send them home with the kids. Have the parents acknowledge them during parent conference. It's just on a checklist.
I agree with Linda on this one, in terms of it, ensuring that the parents acknowledge it. Maybe even, I don't know, I'm far removed from parent conferences, but I don't know if there's something that the parents sign where there just could be a line added to whatever their conference sheet is to say, you know, that they received it, that they received a copy of it, just a check mark. So it could still be given out that first week, but maybe just during the parent conference, the teacher can just reiterate that was, you know, given that first week, because I believe that is important, is given that first week, you know, but it could be reiterated. You received this, you know, this document the first week. Do you have any questions about it? And then at that time, you'll know if they received it or not. You know, what are you talking about? You know, and then maybe at that time, make sure that they do receive it, but maybe just something on their parent conference form that just acknowledged it, if that's possible.
Is there a conference that first week?
Doesn't matter.
No, there's
no, not the first week.
So I'm just saying, so do we hold back the student code of conduct until there's a student conference?
I don't believe we should do that.
I think these are two separate things. I'm not suggesting that you change anything about distributing the code of conduct. That's state law, is it not? I'm asking that in terms of the acknowledgement from parents.
Yeah,
I see it as another opportunity for us to give parents an opportunity to check into our SEL kinds of supports that we may have, especially if they're having a child that's having a problem. If the child isn't having a problem, it'll be just like Tish does. She just signs it and sends it back.
But Linda, I don't have a problem with that. I'm just, it's the logistics of it. You know, if we hand out the student code of conduct at the beginning of the year, and we review it with our, at least, you know, with our students, then 2 months later, we have a parent conference and they say, here, we want you to sign that you got the the student code of conduct.
Well, so, no, maybe you say, I'm not scripting what the teacher says to the parent. I think the teachers should have the flexibility to say what they want to say. What we
But-
want is an acknowledgement that they have received it, and it's an opportunity to check in to see if there's some problems that we need to address. This isn't a top-down thing other than it's a state required thing. This code of conduct and the signing of the code of conduct should be things that help us, again, reach into our families to see what supports may be needed. Hopefully give that teacher an opportunity to bring up anything that she sees happening with that student. So to me, it's a conversation starter that, again, gives teachers and parents an opportunity to get on the same page in terms of expectations of their child's learning experience.
So then we don't pass out the student code of conduct until that first parent conference, so they could say, acknowledge that they received it.
No,
No.
sir. I'm not saying that at all.
Dr. Gant, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I could go either way. I do think some of this might be getting over into what teachers think are feasible, which to me is more related to the work of Dr. Thomas and Dr. Myers and Mr. Gaskins, and then figuring out what would be the best way to engage parents. I do know, like, as a part of this policy, in area 3, it talks about how we will involve parents in the process. But I also think that this leads to a larger conversation, and that is like, what are we trying to get at? So if we think whether we get 500 forms back or 20, I think this also this just has to be a part of a larger conversation that involves much more than just us, because I think part of what I hear you saying is that, yeah, we definitely, like, parents need to be doing more, or parents need to be involved more. I don't see those as separate conversations from where we're going, period, with our discipline. Like, what is the, district's philosophy, on discipline? How will parents be involved? What are we doing to restore healthier behaviors and things like that? So, I mean, I could go either way, but I think ultimately a larger conversation has to happen at some point around what is it we're hoping that our discipline policy does.
I think it's very possible to incorporate both Ms. Davis and Dr. Maddox's suggestions, and I think they're both good ones. I think if we change the wording to say parents will acknowledge receipt of the code and be able to ask any questions and leave it that sufficiently vague, I think we can do that at parent-teacher conference time, and I don't think it involves another sheet of paper. I'm really conscious of us reducing pieces of paper that we feel are important but are not. But the essence of the conversation between a parent and a teacher about discipline is very important. And I agree with all of you on that. I think when we could easily, when they sign into their parent-teacher conference, you sign your name, the date, the time that the conference started. We could add a column that says, I acknowledge that I received the code of conduct and that I've been given the opportunity to ask any questions about it, or something like that. I don't think we need those details in the policy. I think if we revise this to say something like, parents will be given the opportunity to acknowledge receipt of the code and ask any questions, we can take care of how that looks at the time of a parent-teacher conference.
You just make me so happy. Thank you. You always do that. Okay.
So we'll work on revising that language to acknowledge that the communication is important, to acknowledge that we want parents to say, yes, we received it, and we'll leave it sufficiently vague of how exactly that happens at the parent-teacher conference. I like it. This was a good conversation.
I'll also jump in just for a moment. I was trying to listen quietly to everyone's thoughts, and I think I was hearing what concerns were from Mr. Davis as well as from Miss Davis, and then the middle being presented by everyone else. One way, and you're right, Dr. Gann, I think we need to figure this out administratively, but I think what would address this is if we include that signage when we have, it's easier for K-8 students, we'd have to figure it out 9-12, but when you have that initial meet the teacher, come in, get your schedule, and get it out then, we could get at least about 70 to 80% of our families. I think what I was hearing from Mr. Davis, and I get it as a parent, if you ask me in October to acknowledge something I received in August, I really don't remember what I received. So it kind of feels like we're going back saying, say I gave you this and you remember getting it, because I don't know if I remember getting it, because at that point they come home with 20 papers and I'm just signing my name. And so some people may feel, why are they asking me now? I don't remember. Are they trying to catch me? But we could easily do something earlier in the year and then come back in October and say, for those families who did not come to open house, meet the teacher, I realized you weren't here. I didn't get your signature. I don't know if you recall receiving this. If not, here's another copy, and then have them sign. And that way you would have gotten it in the hands of the majority and had it acknowledged early on. So those are details we can work out, but I think that would address the concerns I was hearing from different groups.
Lovely.
Okay. Yeah, I want to point out the time. I mean, if people got to be done in 25 minutes, I know that there's some other discussion points in this policy. So if we can move on.
We should
Don?
take a vote, please, on policy JCDA as revised.
So I move that we have to move it up to posting it on we have to post it, right, for public comment?
Move it to the board for
Yeah.
that decision to be
Oh,
voted on.
Right. Sorry. Move it to the board for that decision with.
Is there a
the-
motion?
Yes. That's what
Okay,
I'm-
second.
Second.
All those in favor? All right. Okay, now we can talk about the student code of conduct.
Okay, we are going to walk through the code and I'll scroll down on my screen, but ahead of us doing that, if I could just take about 2 minutes, and because there's so many members that are both new to the board and new to the policy committee, since we've had some pretty comprehensive revisions to the code, I'd just like to provide a brief history of revisions to the code of conduct. It is required by state law that we revise it annually, which is why we're going through this drill. And I would like you to know that that's not something that simply happens in the month ahead of the policy meeting before we bring it to you. This happens all year long. We're continually seeking feedback from stakeholders and school and building leaders to ask for feedback on the code all year long. What I want you to know is that we did a very comprehensive revision to the code of conduct. We pretty much threw out our old code that we'd functioned with in the Clarke County School District for about 20 or 30 years, with it not looking very different. And that happened in the 16-17 school year. And it was on direction of the board at that time. And to be completely transparent, it was kind of post Cedar Shoals and the incidents that happened there regarding discipline and attendance. And we were asked to look at our policies. And so during the 16-17 school year, we spent about 6 to 8 months with a comprehensive review of the code of conduct. We worked in consultation with the Georgia Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. They're a nonprofit out of Atlanta, and I would encourage you, if you're curious about these type of things, to look at their website. They're an excellent resource, and they were a really great partner to us in this work. What they helped us to do is, over the course of those 8 months, we held 12 stakeholder focus groups. We went into the community, we went into schools, we met with teachers and parents and students and community members and administrators and asked for their feedback on how we should revise the code. We used the best practice research at the time, and I know Dr. Yeager, you had asked to see some of that. I will be happy to pull what we used then, and there's even some more current literature and research that we've drawn upon about student discipline and best practices. But at that time, we used some model codes from Rochester, New York, and other places. And again, in collaboration with the Georgia Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, completely revamped our code of conduct. Some of the most substantial changes were, we decided to align our code with the state categories. So we took out a lot of subjectivity. We had offenses like verbal aggression, which weren't state reportable, were just kind of made up in the Clarke County School District, but people were having, understandably, a difficult time deciding what is verbal aggression, what counts as verbal aggression. And so we decided to be the most equitable and fair. We would only have offenses in our code that aligned with the state reportable categories that the state of Georgia requires. And we also added the inside covers of the code, which you can't see here because they're not the actual policy. But if you have a copy of the paper code at home, or if you remember, you might know that we added language on the inside covers. We looked at the reading level, and the board at the time charged us with to try to make the code as accessible as possible to as many students and families. So we were very mindful of giving some summary language to the legalese that's contained in the code so that it could be more accessible to families. And those are some of the substantial changes. We also really increased the language in the code around restorative practices, student supports, progressive discipline, what all of that means. This year, the changes that you see reflected and recommended to the policy committee at this time are based on, like I said, year-round feedback, but also 2 half-day meetings, which occurred in January and February, where we pulled together all levels of administrators from elementary, middle, and high schools, behavior specialists, psychologists, counselors, our data specialists, and even Dr. Richard Welsh was luckily here in town in Athens and joined us for one of those meetings. We had robust conversations. We looked through every page of the code. We looked through the discipline matrix. And so I want to assure the policy committee that these recommendations are made with significant input. I also had face-to-face meetings with our principals and assistant principals as teams and met with them each for a couple of hours and asked for their feedback on the code. What do they struggle with? What's unclear? How could it be more useful to them? And so, and also we've based some of the changes that you'll see this year on Dr. Richard Welch's research. He's given us some policy and practice recommendations based on his student discipline research, and we've changed our code to align with his recommendations. Finally, I say this every year we look at the code. I think while it is very important, it really is a tool. It's a piece of paper, several pieces of paper, but it's a tool. The real work of student discipline is and always will be in the context of relationships with people. And so it is a guide, it is a tool. The most important parts happen after we approve the code, with the training, with our continued use of restorative practices, and our intentional focus on reducing what we believe is the right thing to do, reducing the use of OSS and ISS as exclusionary discipline, because that's what the research tells us. That's where we need to focus our efforts. So it's we always say too, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We continue to revise it. That's why we do it every year. We're working to get it closer to right. We're aligning it with state laws, but in the end, it's a tool for our schools to do their work. So there's my my soapbox and my beliefs about the code. Thanks for indulging me. Let's see. Let's just go through, and we can stop wherever there is highlight or strike through. That is the indication to you that there's been a change, and you can follow along on your own screens. You'll see in the table of contents, there's no page numbers, and that's because we wait until printing, till it goes to print, to add the page numbers, because things may be changing as far as which pages. Draw your attention, these pages 3 to 11, I always say they're the most important but least read parts of the Code of Conduct. This is where we talk about our beliefs, our philosophical underpinnings, and just kind of some of the concepts and constructs around student discipline. And so you see, we took out where we reference certain pages of the code because that gets cumbersome to update. We didn't think it was really helpful to the readability. So that was the first strike through that you'll see. These strike throughs on page 5, you'll see in a minute, we've taken out a pyramid of progressive discipline to make more clear that progressive discipline happens along a continuum and there's many different steps. And so we've changed the matrix, we've embedded the progressive discipline steps into the actual code. This was one of the recommendations that Dr. Welsh gave us. that when we included a pyramid of interventions, it looks like it's progressive instead of kind of circular, in that administrators are deciding on interventions based on individual student needs. So that's why we just took out the language here on page 5. It's not one step follows the next, follows the next. And you'll see about the changes to the matrix that are struck through here. The matrix isn't at the back, it's embedded all the way through the code now.
Okay, Don, can you stop there where it says restorative practices?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very strong paragraph. I do wonder or have a concern that a lot of what's written there, do all our teachers know about effective statements and dialogue circles and collaborative norm setting and restorative circles? I mean, it's certainly where we want to aspire to. I just don't know how. I think it's great, but I just don't know how we are in terms of consistently carrying that out in all the schools, with all the teams and that type of thing.
Sure, that's a good question. And like I said, the parts about professional learning and training and what practices are actually going on really do happen following the implementation annually of the code of conduct. So I would say, yes, restorative practices, as we've committed to as a district, are embedded in professional learning all across from the district level to the school level in many different ways. I'm not sure that I would be open to ideas of how to articulate that any differently in the actual code of conduct other than our commitment to those practices. We do have a professional learning plan for the district that may answer some of those questions for you. Professional learning that's provided around restorative practices would be reflected in that PL plan.
Well, I guess, for instance, I don't know if I could explain the difference between a restorative circle and a dialogue circle. I wouldn't, I mean, or what effective statements are. And I'm not saying I shouldn't know, but I'm I want to make sure that we're not saying just pretty words, that the majority of our experienced teachers say, oh yeah, I know exactly what each of those concepts are. So I just throw that out there. I'm not really proposing any changes, except just a concern that we're, we seem to be throwing a lot of stuff out there, and we're still trying to work on restorative practices, which I guess would be all of that. Just terminology for restorative practices, I assume.
If you think that it is misleading when we say examples of, if you think that misleads people to think that that's happening somehow universally, I can simply remove that sentence, because I think
I'd like to hear other people's opinion. I'm not, it's just something that I read that I said, boy, that's a mouthful. But we do have restorative circles in they're functioning in all our schools.
To different extents, sure. There's different schools have chosen to utilize their resources and their professional learning, and I would say different schools are further along in the continuum of their own training around restorative practices. So this statement isn't meant to be a blanket promise that everyone has the same level of skills. I would say similar to how our teachers perhaps don't have instructionally the same. They're always learning, and so we're at different. I think that's a professional learning question, and perhaps I'm struggling to figure out how to reflect that in the code other than our commitment to the practices, our commitment to continual learning.
Okay. Okay. Well, if no one else has any concern, let's just move on.
I think I just had I would agree, Greg. I think, but I don't know that now is the time, but I'm just trying to figure out somewhere there's a disconnect between our code of conduct and what actually happens. And the results. And that is not just now with new and like we'll see sort of how this moves forward this year, but over the past couple of years. And then even before that with the same code of conduct. And it's hard for me to tell, like, regardless of what words are here with restorative practices, is it a philosophical district issue? Is it a policy issue, a code of conduct issue, or is it more, as you mentioned, Dr. Myers, related to the professional development and the training and also the involvement of other stakeholders, including parents and teachers and things like that, that really are really on the front lines of shaping behaviors and things like that, and the kids involved in them. So I can't quite tell, but I do think at some point, I would, as a policy committee, as a part of the policy committee, I would love to hear, or I know you mentioned you all met several stakeholders. I didn't hear that parents were a part of that, but they may have been. But I think in the future, this ties into our strategic planning and really figuring out, like, philosophically, where are we going to draw our line and say, this is what we do, this is what's important, this is how parents are involved, this is how teachers are involved. And I don't know that it's something that we can address in policy meeting, but I do want to sort of go on the record and say I do think this needs to be a part of our strategic planning, because last year I know it was around this time as well, and I want us to, just like you all have given forethought as a policy committee, and as having impact on strategic planning, I do think that's something that more people need to be a part of those conversations.
I think that's, yeah. Well, anybody else wants to weigh in on that? I mean, I don't want to hold the process up. I do agree with what Lakeisha said too, but it would seem like we have a lot to cover in a little bit of time. So anybody else want to weigh in on this particular piece? Okay, Don, we're going to leave it as is. So let's continue.
Okay. And don't forget also, it'll eventually go out for public comment, whether in the next month or in 2 months. And so there's lots of times to suggest revisions. This is just our first look at it. And so if anyone has any wording that they think is more clear, I am completely open to suggestions of wording. I have all the ones I've received are reflected in these changes. So once it goes out and once you've had more time with it, please offer suggestions how we can improve our use of words on a piece of paper that try to explain a very complicated concept as student discipline. So again, some of our explanation of our beliefs around equity in student discipline, how we use trauma-informed practices, basically that, and all through these first pages of the document, what you're going to see is explaining that nothing in our code is zero tolerance and nothing in it is formulaic. We understand that this is about children who have different types of circumstances and different histories. And so in all of our discipline practices, we acknowledge that. And I think that's what the words on this page especially speak to. Also, our commitment to positive behavior interventions and supports as the foundation to student discipline.
So Don, as you're kind of paging through, what is the reading level on this document now? Flush Kincaid, did you guys run that?
For the whole document, it's very, very high, Ms. Davis, because of all the required language, that the legal words in the statewide definitions.
Mm-hmm. That's still my number one concern is that, again, I don't know about the majority, but well, I do know where our reading level is in the community as well as in the school system. I've got an idea. And so that's been the challenge for me all along, is that we can't get it down to simple words. And yeah, that's going to always be my challenge. But if this is the best we can do for now, let's go for now. But my goal is to, even if we go away from sentence structure to more bulleted lists, like I see down, all behavior is learned, right? Any repeated behavior is serving a purpose for the student. You know, there are some, I'm looking for those shorter sentences and the language not to be quite as stilted. And I understand the requirements, but yeah, I'm looking for us to be able to translate that in some way.
Okay, again, I'm open to suggestions. You know, when we added the inside covers to the code, that was part of what we sought to accomplish.
That's exactly right.
If no one read anything else, then those inside covers, which are bigger fonts, you know,
Right.
Easier vocabulary, that we hope that spoke to the spirit of the code. But I understand your concern, and I wish there were a perfect answer. I think we're getting closer, but I'm open. If there's any phrasing throughout any of this that anyone would like to suggest changes to, please do.
I've got a question of something that was taken out under vandalism. I guess it's Rule 20.
We're getting there. Let's very
Okay.
quickly move to the definitions, because a lot of
Okay.
on these pages 7 and 8, really, we added a word, but nothing has substantially changed. We are suggesting that we remove this matrix. It's confusing. It didn't make sense. The feedback was no one really used it. It was difficult to understand. And what you're going to see is instead we have added to the definitions of progressive discipline on this page. So we've tried to explain to parents and students what we mean by check in, check out, what we mean by loss of privileges, to just in a list explain the progressive discipline steps, because again, it's misleading to say you start at tier 1, go to tier 2, go to tier 3. Discipline is not linear like that. It's not formulaic. It's not if you do this, then that happens. That is not the spirit of our code. Our code gives wide discretion to understand each individual student in the context of a relationship. But we do use progressive discipline steps. We don't hit a mosquito with a sledgehammer. We have all of these different nuanced progressive redirections of behavior that we use. And this page tries to describe what those are. So what is a parent conference? That's one of the ways an administrator can note how they've implemented discipline. So sometimes we're trying to get to the point. Sometimes families say to us, nothing happened. And what they really mean is no one was suspended. And that's frustrating to administrators, because they might have spent hours and hours and hours in conferences and restorative circles and restitution and helping the child understand the consequences of their behavior. Lots has happened. It's just not a suspension. So this page really to articulate what can happen in progressive discipline steps.
I think falling back to what Linda was saying earlier about the language, this is something that perhaps would lend itself more to kind of a bullet system.
Okay.
You know, that because this is something that we're putting in practice. This is not state code or state law. So, Linda, what would you think about that?
I'm all for making it simple and getting the message across. So I tell you, the thing that drives my behavior on this is the process called info mapping, where you only say the critical things that need to be said in a sentence and you just take away the dressing. And so it's a science, and it was developed in the 80s or so. But again, it would definitely take something that is as complicated as this, and make it tabular or bulleted, and again, separating the ideas so that the message is clear. I think that even as a parent or as an old person and reading this, I have to work to keep up with what I'm reading about. And so again, it's the same challenge. It's just the words are too stilted, and they're not from my world. And so if the majority of our parents and the majority of our students aren't from academia, then this is a challenge.
Okay.
for
I mean, this-
reading and
Take
comprehension.
we'll certainly take that into consideration, and we can try, especially on this page of definitions of progressive discipline steps.
Because there are like 12 of these listed. So perhaps a change in format would make it clearer that, so,
Okay. We can definitely do that.
okay.
So
Moving
now,
on.
okay, now we're getting into the actual definitions of prohibited behaviors. Many of these changes, which you're going to see in highlight, are based on the State Department of Education changes to their reportable definitions. And you'll remember that we decided as a district to align with state reportable definitions. And so we've also, you'll see these boxes with the X's. We took what used to be in the back of the code as a discipline matrix, and we've embedded it following each prohibited behavior in order to be more specific, to add categories that are specific to that behavior. And I'm going to show you what I mean. And also to make sure that we recognize there is and there should be a difference in discipline consequences for elementary, middle, and high school students. So instead of having two separate codes of conduct, one for elementary and one for secondary, which is always an option in our district, we've decided to separate out the elementary consequences with the secondary in this way. So here's one example under alcohol. It used to be our matrix only had 5 or 6 options across the top here, and they weren't all specific to the actual offense. So now what we're able to do is say, if you bring alcohol to school, you'll be referred to the responsibility awareness program, the RAP class, which again, we defined up here. What is a responsibility awareness program? It's an educational class designed to teach adolescents about negative consequences of drugs and alcohol. And so we're able to be a little more specific and drill down into the matrix when it follows each prohibited behavior.
I really love that. Thank you.
You're welcome. This was a recommendation of our building leaders and Dr. Welsh all at the same time. They all at the same time said, we like this better. And so thanks, Ms. Davis. We feel really good about it.
Yeah, I think it's good.
So there's not really any changes. Well, here, battery. This is one of the next changes. And this is because the state separated out into a different prohibited behavior, which you'll see on number 44, a physical attack on school personnel other than teachers is still here, but a physical attack on teachers specifically should be reported as violence against a teacher. We added that as a new category. Again, I want to draw like computer trespass by separating the matrix into each offense. We're able to say what's going to happen to you if you're guilty of computer trespass. One of the natural logical consequences that would happen is you might lose your device, the use of your device for a time, or you might not be able to use your device when you're not facing the teacher so they can see what's on your device, or the teacher may have some controls over what you can see on your device. Anyways, you can see where this natural logical consequence of a loss of privileges specific to a loss of your device might be the most appropriate way to discipline a student who's misusing their technology. So we feel like this allows us to drill down and give very specific recommendations for those progressive discipline steps. Again, these are the progressive discipline steps across the top. Disorderly conduct, we just struck one line that was changed in the statewide definition. Again, with drugs, you'll see that referral to a RAP class is something that we want to make sure is included.
can I interrupt for just a second? I'm gonna have to go. I have a 4 o'clock call coming in. I looked through these and I don't have any fundamental issues with any of the changes that I saw. Once I talked to Dawn about the, we made big changes a couple years ago, and these are just small changes to get us in line with the government, with the state. So if I have to go and cut off, I would vote. I don't know if I can do that if I go away, but I'm supportive of these changes.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks, Dr. Yeager. Continue to provide feedback as we all.
I will.
But thank you.
Bye-bye, Patricia.
So just,
I'll wait till the call comes in, but
okay,
I'll
stop me at
disappear.
any point. What we also did is we only put in the grid, and this is an extreme example, I hope this never happens, homicide, there's only a severity level 3. It's not applicable to have a level 1 or 2, so we didn't even waste space on the page and confuse matters by having severity level 1 and 2 with something like homicide. Minor change, but we feel like it's adding to the clarity of the code. Mr. Davis, you said you had a question on one of these. I want to make sure we don't go past it. Do you remember what it was?
It's 20 when you get to it.
Okay, we're getting there. Just making sure as I scroll down if there's any questions. Again, our administrators vetted where these check boxes should go. What do they typically do in cases of any of these prohibited behaviors? So this has all been vetted again. Tobacco is another one that changed because the state changed their definition to pull out a whole nother category, number 52, electronic smoking devices. So with our increase in vaping, the state asked us to state report when we discipline based on vaping. So we need to have that as another section so we can differentiate in our data and report to the state correctly. We would also refer to a RAP class, just FYI, around vaping or tobacco. Vandalism, was that the one
Yes.
you had a question on?
Why was that particular phrase taken out?
I don't know, I'd have to ask the state DOE. That was how they revised their definition, and we're trying not to make up our own definitions, but to completely align with how the state asks us to report.
Because I did read the 29, the bullying, and it really doesn't specifically address what we took out here. So.
Well, one option is we could leave these words in and put them in italics, which would indicate that it's different from the statewide definition.
So is the bullying definition that also comes from the state?
All of them do.
All of them do. So this is potentially where the governor wants to put another one in called gangs, I guess. Okay. So this is all state language.
The definitions and the severity levels, how we are asked to state report and define behaviors, yes, are all based on the state DOE definitions that they give to us.
Okay.
So that's why we struck through this, is because they tweaked the state definition. I think they were seeking to, it doesn't change substantially because public or private property includes the property of another student. So my guess is just like we seek to simplify and eliminate extemporaneous language, my guess is on this one, that's what the state did as well.
Okay.
But I could try to seek more information or clarity about their thinking on that. Trying to see where the next, so all of this is in state law and reflected in the state definition of bullying. Number 29 is bullying. They didn't change the definition at all this year. Where they did change a definition is in student incivility. And so that's where these words are crossed out to align with the statewide definition once again. Here's, you mentioned gangs. There is an offense around gang-related behavior, and that's the definition.
This was not changed, right? We had this last year.
It's not changed. If it's not in highlight, it's not new.
Okay.
Electronic smoking device, this is all new. Number 42. Again, I mentioned violence against a teacher is its own specific category. That's 44. And that's as far as we get. That's all of there's now 44 different potential violations. The next page in the code is the role of law enforcement in schools. This was new back in 16-17 as well. This was written by our former chief of police, Fred Stevens, and our current chief of police took a look at it this year again, and Chief Sizemore said, I couldn't write it any better. Leave it in. It explains clearly the emphasis on police not being disciplinarians. They're not used as bouncers to force compliance, that student discipline is the responsibility of school administrators, and that they use a community policing model to build relationships with students.
Just out of curiosity, when we say police officers, we're also talking about SROs, right? I mean, that we use those interchangeably.
Yes.
Okay.
School-based police are SROs. By that in here, I could make sure we include language that we mean SROs if you think that would add.
No, I mean that I'm still learning about, you know, the terminology that we're using.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Dr. Meyer.
Sure.
With the role of law enforcement in schools, I know in the elementary and middle schools is a little bit, from my recollection, different. But in high schools, are SROs or police officers, do they write referrals? Do they still write referrals and resolve discipline?
They're not disciplinarians. They're not writing referrals and implementing discipline, student discipline. Absolutely not. That's what this says, is they're not disciplinarians. They might write a report if they witnessed something happening, if it wasn't a crime that they needed to take action on as far as reporting of a crime or handling it through their end. If they might say to a principal, I saw this happen, and the principal would implement the student discipline, but they're not disciplinarians. That they don't. There's two separate parts. There's the school discipline part, and there's the did someone break the law part. Sometimes both things are true, but most times it's simply a school discipline issue.
Okay.
Sense?
Huh?
Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, I understood it conceptually, but I was just talking about like practically. I think I recall like sometimes there were cases where, you know, with high schools, for instance, like when there are fights and things like that, even if it is not, I feel like I recall times when officers have been involved in writing students up at the high school level. And so I just wanted to inquire about that.
you mean writing them up as far as implementing student discipline and documenting it in our system?
Mm-hmm.
If that's happening, I'm quite unaware of it, and it would be contrary to the spirit of the separation of law enforcement and school discipline.
Okay. And it could have been, I'm not aware of it currently. I was just curious if that were, you know, if that still happened and the circumstances under which it happened.
Are we
I'd be happy
talking
to
about
ask
in the
our-
commission of a crime where they actually get charged with battery or?
Well,
And
and
the
it could have
police come in?
it could be Miss Linda. And so I don't think it happened often enough, but I was just asking because, you know, because this write-up is here. And just wanted to be sure that that's not occurring.
I think that's one of the reasons, Dr. Gant, that we put this whole page. We thought it was important enough to have a whole page explaining their role to try to help folks understand that they are separate, distinct. There's one that's involved in is a law broken, and there's another, the much bigger category. 95% of the time, student discipline is about school discipline being administered only by a school administrator. But I'll be happy to consult with especially our high school principals and our middle school principals where there are SROs, and just, this is part of the continual training to make sure they understand there's a separation and they shouldn't ever defer their school discipline responsibilities to an SRO.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
I was
guess-
just curious because I know at the high school, it is just much harder with the number of students and the number of things that go on. I mean, so yeah, I was just curious and wanted to be sure that this statement, you know, to the extent possible, was reflective.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess along the same lines, I mean, my question has on this subject has always kind of been, okay, if one student assaults another student, that's against the student code of conduct, but it's also against the law. And so it's both a violation of the student code of conduct, but it's also a violation of state law. So I don't know enough as to how schools make that determination. You know, presumably it's every case is different, and you know, and that maybe that's just the nature of the beast.
Mr. Davis, in those instances, usually you would have two different reports written up. So you would have a school level discipline that is written up by the school administrator, and they handle per student code of conduct. And then the police would write up an incident report based on the legal infraction that occurred. I mean, sometimes I know there are times when the school may do something, I don't want to say lesser, but you know, they are aware of circumstances, they know things that have happened, they're working with them, but that student still has broken a law. So I've heard sometimes, you know, where they may say, okay, well, this is what's happening here, but you can't dictate what's going to happen once you go to juvenile court, or in the case of the age of the student, actual for that legal violation. So there are usually two different reports written up, and one is an actual discipline referral versus a legal incident report.
Now, would those reports, Dr. Thomas, would those reports also be, would they be carried out differently by an SRO versus a law enforcement from the Clarke County Police Department?
Generally, no, right, Dr. Myers? Because that SRO is still, our police are still working in the capacity of a school resource officer. So, you know, if a student breaks the law, whether that report's taken from our police department or ACCPD's officer that's working as a school resource officer, if a law is broken, it is broken, and that incident report's written. Is that correct, Dr. Myers?
Right, and all those decisions happen with the district attorney's office and the juvenile court. The simple writing of a report is not a charge. In other words, that all of what happens next happens in the judicial system, and the law enforcement officer is perhaps writing a report. I will say, I think most often they are choosing to not write reports and letting the school administrators, the principal and the AP, handle it through school discipline. And that's quite frankly what our administrators sometimes are frustrated about, because they say to a child, if this happened next year out on the street in front of the Walmart, things are going to go really differently for you. If this same behavior happens out in the community, while it happens at school, there's a lot of understanding of child development. The administrators take discipline and use school discipline rather than deferring to SROs to write a criminal complaint or report. But the writing of a complaint does not dictate what happens in the legal system. And luckily, we have a lot of good work going on with our solicitor and our district attorney to work on pre-arrest diversion. We have pre-trial diversion now in our town, but Chief Sizemore and I have been meeting with the law enforcement agencies and with the solicitor and the DA, because they're really committed as a town, as a government entity, to having pre-arrest diversion. And that's going to greatly benefit a lot of our 17, 18, 19-year-old students, so that there wouldn't even be an arrest on their record, that the court system is able to remediate their behavior, have them participate in just like we do at school. It's the same process. They're basically borrowing from what we do at school, is these progressive discipline steps, but not even have an arrest hit on your record. So when you go to apply for a job, it'll be as if it never happened. There won't be an arrest reflected on your record. So we've been working closely with ACC to put that in place for next year. But I'd be happy to, I think it would be really interesting, maybe Dr. Thomas, if Chief Sizemore would want to speak at a work session or answer any of these questions, maybe alongside of some of our building administrators. I think you're asking really good questions, and I understand the curiosity that board members have. How does it look in practice? How do you make those split-second decisions about our SROs charging a student with a crime or not?
I'm making a note of that.
I really like that page. I think it helps a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then this is all, these definitions of the procedures are required by state law for us to include in our code. So it really just outlines these are the disciplinary procedures for the unacceptable behaviors that include in school, out of school suspension, and going to a hearing. No changes have been made. These are the same processes. We added a little bit of clarity, as you'll see, under provisions applicable to students with disabilities, because there are some subtle differences in how we discipline students who are served. There's disabled students who are served under IDEA who have an IEP, students who are served under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And there's some nuanced differences. Dr. Anna Morgan, who's our 504 coordinator, has worked with Andrea Jolliffe to make sure that we have greater clarity in our code. And so you can see we separated out numbers 4 and 5 on this page to say in situations with a student with an IEP, it's handled this way. And situations with a student with a 504, it's handled this way when the misconduct is not a manifestation of their disability. So this is it's very technical as far as how we use the manifestation review process to determine if the behavior is a manifestation of their disability. But are there any questions about this, about 504 and special ed? We're really just trying again with Ms. Jolliffe and Dr. Morgan's help to add greater clarity to this code section.
So maybe I missed it. What happened to the strike of number 6?
Well,
Is that a waiver?
in general, it said students with disabilities, but there's basically 2 categories of students with disabilities, Ms. Davis, those with the IEP and those with a 504. So
Right.
we started 6 and we put 4 and 5 to say it happens this way with an IEP and this way with a 504.
So those are the only 2 categories, and that's what I wasn't sure about. Okay, great, thank you.
We were too general last year by lumping all students with disabilities. We serve this way when in fact there's some nuanced differences between an IEP and a 504.
So, I'm always concerned about the one who hasn't been diagnosed yet. But okay, thank you.
Well, what I can reassure you is even if they've been identified as potentially having a disability, these provisions and protections apply. So you don't have to get to the point of having an IEP written or having a eligibility determination meeting. If a school staff member or a parent has suspected a child of having a disability and they're in the evaluation process, they're protected under IDEA. So that's good news.
They can actually be protected even if they're not in the evaluation process. I think the manifestation is required if you should have identified the child if there's been a child find violation, and good lawyers will raise that as a defense if it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. That's very true. So I think, Ms. Davis, I think that lots of people, including you, have those concerns. And so that's why those protections exist in the law. We have the language about House Bill 740. This isn't new. This was passed during the last legislative session to nudge school districts to reconsider expelling students in grades preschool through 3rd grade, to limit the use of exclusionary discipline. And so we just reminded everyone of that this year again. We then have a few pages where we've decided to include excerpts of the state law. And we think it's important enough around bullying and weapons that we went ahead and just restated the law. We didn't need to, but we think there's enough good language in here specific to cyberbullying and things, which isn't necessarily included in the statewide definition, but it is in the state law. And so we thought it was a good use of a couple of pages in our code of conduct. And then I think we're actually required to have the definition of weapons, firearms, and hazardous objects in our code. Isn't that right, Mike? I think we are. So we have those definitions.
I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. What were you asking me?
I think we're required in the code to restate this state law about weapons, firearms, and hazardous objects.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we could waive now if we wanted to, but it's probably good not to waive that one.
Okay. And then finally, at the very end of the code, and this is typical of I think many, if not all, school districts that I've seen, we also include some really important information that we want to make sure parents see. I always struggle a little bit because it's not completely germane to student discipline, but we know that every parent gets a code of conduct. And so school districts historically and traditionally have included this information in the back of the code because then we know that every parent got it. And so this is clubs and organization withdrawal form. The law requires us to give an opt-out to students participating in clubs or organizations that their parents don't want them to participate in. And so we include that here. Also, the opt-out information for students taking the Georgia Student Health Survey is included here. We have not had any parents opt out in recent years, but we have to give them the option. And instead of sending home another piece of paper, we ask them to have this information here about how they can opt out of the survey if they want. Also, another law requires us to provide FERPA notice. We also have this on our website, the FERPA notice to parents and guardians, but we think it's a good use of a few paragraphs in the back of the code to remind parents that they have rights to privacy. And directory information is aligned with the FERPA rights that we provide directory information, and unless they tell us that they don't want us to, and that would come in a written request to the school. Again, I can't remember any of those that we've had in recent memory. So there is your draft proposed 2021 Code of Student Conduct. I'll say it again. My feelings are not hurt. If anyone finds any corrections, additions, deletions, suggestions, revisions, this work works better when we do it together. And so I encourage you to, as you have time, continue to look at it. You know, one of the things that's really helpful to us is we look at other codes of conduct. If it can be done better somewhere else, we want to see what other counties have done. Everyone has their code of conduct on their website. And so I encourage anyone who's particularly interested to go and look at other county code of conducts from other school districts and offer up any other suggestions.
I think, Don, if I'm summarizing it correctly, the only thing that we're suggesting would be that page on various forms of progressive, progressive discipline, I guess you would phrase it. But anyway, kind of refining that particular page. I think that's the only thing that we've actually offered in terms of concrete changes. Unless anyone else has anything else.
We deleted the pyramid, but we put more descriptors, and I know that Angela will help me to put those in a bulleted format and make it easier to read. And thank you, Ms. Davis, for that. But then you're right, Mr. Davis. The other significant changes are just aligning our definitions to the state
law
definitions, and then inserting the matrix, which I think is the change that our administrators are most excited about, putting the actual progressive discipline steps immediately following each definition. So you don't have to flip back and forth to the very back of the code to find the matrix.
I think that's great.
Yeah, that's the matrix, even as it is not meant to be formulaic. It's not
the guideline,
a grid where if you do this, then you get that. It's simply suggested progressive discipline steps. We want to give lots of suggestions because what we want our teachers and administrators doing is having lots of ways to interact with children that help to modify their behavior when their behavior isn't where we want it to be, ahead of using any exclusionary discipline like ISS and OSS. So we're just giving lots more choices this year, I think.
What I really like about that is, I was happy when we got rid of the matrix, and I was really disappointed when it came back. So it wasn't me alone. It was teachers that had a major issue with that matrix disappearing. So have we had teachers take a look at this already?
We have, Ms. Davis. They were included in our work groups.
Okay.
One feels like this finally strikes the balance between a matrix or no matrix.
I really like that. Thank you so much. And again, I haven't read this from the standpoint of trying to make it easier to read. I just read it with my teaching eyes. But it is challenging. I think just like I love the pull out that you did before and put the things on the back of the cover there that helped get it down to something more digestible. It's a lot for, these kids would call this a chapter book. I'm thinking about my kids in Wednesday night Bible study. They would call this a chapter book and they run from that. But I really like the way we condensed it and kind of put the highlights at that front cover. So if we continue that, I think this will eventually get to a place where we can kind of have a pull out that says, this is the code, this is the legal part of the code, but this is what it means to you, and so just getting it to that level where people can actually digest it would be awesome.
Okay, any other suggestions or comments about the code?
There's I have one comment, and it's not about the code, but it's about one portion of the code, and that's the ISS portion. And I would like for that to be an action item. This is probably directed to you, Dr. Thomas, around what happens in ISS for our kids. So that's a whole different subject, but I'd like for that to be one of our discussion points at some point.
Yes, ma'am. I've added that to my list of maybe having Chief Sizemore and an administrator present at a work session about how they work collaboratively on those reports, and then also what happens for students in ISS. Yes, ma'am.
That would be great. And I'm telling you, I got a poster child for 5 or 6 for you. Anytime you want to do some research, they're in my Wednesday night Bible study.
Okay, well, Lakeisha, you have anything you want to add before we vote?
No.
Tawana?
No.
So is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we're gonna push this forward to our, let's see, we would probably have it, some discussion at the work session, right, Don?
That's
Or at
correct.
least introduce it there and see if there are
That's-
any questions from other members of the board.
That's correct. Thank you for everyone pulling together today, because what this allows us to do is get it on the work session agenda and hopefully move it forward to public comment. But again, we can, we can take any other revisions during that public comment period from the board or the community. So thank you for meeting this week and practicing our Zoom skills. And it will be on your work session agenda next week.
Yeah, I wish I had a schematic of what these buttons are, but I guess I just live and learn. Maybe I can practice with my wife how to use this Zoom. Okay.
Greg, I went to
is there-
zoom.com and there's a nice tutorial there.
Oh, great. Thank you, Linda, for pointing that out. Okay, is there a motion to end the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay. Over and out. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. And all the folks that made this happen today. Stay safe.
Thanks, Greg. You too.
Bye-bye.